Good day, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of our podcast on information security and security testing. Today, I'd like to take us back to some security fundamentals. I've been in this game for quite a while, and it's quite distressing still to see some of the basics that aren't being done. From an external penetration testing perspective, and in fact, in a lot of our security testing, one of the common findings still is weak passwords. It's quite distressing, when you're talking to clients about data loss prevention and AI and all that sort of stuff, and then some users out there still entering password 1 as their password. So that is something we include in most of our testing, in fact all of our testing, and unfortunately still a common finding. So I'm just going to ask Rob just to fill us in a little bit about weak passwords and how we go about testing it from a Mobius perspective, and some of the vectors that he employs in order to test these controls.
Thanks,
Rob?
Pat. So as part of an external penetration test, weak passwords will often be one of the first things we look at. Mainly because it's really that easy to test for them. And if you find one, it's a really great way to get into an organization or to get into areas of an organization where you can extract more information. So it's always a good place to start. And as you mentioned, it is a fundamental and it's fairly easy to test. And the best place to test a lot of these weak passwords is on a corporate email system. Pretty much everybody has email, and everybody has a username and a password to log into that email. And more often than not, those email passwords are linked to your corporate login. So the first thing we want to do is find out as many people as we can who are employees of your organization. And by using various methodologies of open source intelligence gathering, we'll dig through various repositories and build a list of usernames or email addresses of your organization. And instead of trying 100 passwords per account, which will create a lot of noise and probably lock accounts out due to failed password attempts, we'll take one password at a time and try them across the range of accounts that we find. And this is a very common technique known as password spraying. So not only do you hopefully not locking accounts out, you don't cause as much noise on the end system, and you find these weak passwords by spraying across all the users. And we'll typically start with the worst of all bad passwords, those with the word password in them. Password 1, password with an @ sign, password with a 0, combinations of both, of which there are quite a few. And from there, we'll move on a lot of other common and bad passwords that we see throughout the assessments, months of the year, seasons like winter, summer, the organization name itself. And by periodically spraying all the user accounts with these weak passwords, we get a sense of whether or not any of them are being used. Or if we get any hits, we know straight away that they are. And once you have that one single account, it's often a very slippery slope into total compromise from there. So weak passwords are dangerous. They're very prominent, and they're pretty easy to test for, which all in all leads to quite a severe scenario.
Yeah, it sounds like it's quite it's a fundamental control, but in today's age where all the systems are essentially internet facing in some way, it becomes so much easier to try find those that one weak link. Rob, maybe just talk us through, a brute force attack versus a dictionary attack to kind of arrive at some of those passwords.
So a brute force attack, one would look at an enormous list of passwords and try them against a single account, which is far less likely to yield results and far more likely to lock that account out, as opposed to a single password across all the accounts.
So, and the dictionary, you would have a list of passwords that you would attempt, as opposed to kind of using several servers to try essentially crack the password. So there's no huge science to it in terms
No,
of the dictionary side of things, and that's actually the
definitely.
simpler one. Hey?
It is, and there are
Um,
many available for download. Password dictionaries are fairly common on the internet. So they're not difficult to get hold of, and they are plentiful. So definitely not a complex attack vector.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the ironies when it comes to password is that when you're employing a dictionary attack, P at SSW0RD is exactly the same as password. In terms of length of time to crack that particular one. So I think a lot of people are thinking, okay, I'm employing complex passwords, but if it's something as simple as changing letters to numbers, those are all in those dictionaries, and actually don't take any more time to crack from your perspective, I would imagine.
Yes, absolutely not. And those will pass the complexity requirements because there is a special character and a number in them, so they often will get through and be allowed. But from a password spray perspective, they're fairly easy to guess and come across.
Something interesting to listen to you kind of intro that section, as a non-penetration tester myself, when you talk about open source intelligence gathering around the employees of the organization, that sounds really sort of mystical and quite scientific, but something like LinkedIn kind of falls into that category, doesn't it?
LinkedIn is a great place to find people, something we commonly use. So yeah, an absolute treasure chest of information in there about your employees, even the systems you use. Lots of juicy information.
So it's a constant battle. Weak passwords. One can get technologies which helps blacklist certain weak passwords. I'd urge organizations to start employing those if they're not already. Relatively simple to plug in. And then user awareness is critical. Just so that people are following, the NIST guidelines are rather to have longer passphrases, which are far more difficult to crack and typically don't appear in any dictionary. So employ a passphrase and then have longer periods between changes. The old school sort of 8 characters complex and change it every 30 days. We've kind of moved on a little bit from that, but it's a constant battle against weak passwords. So yeah, thanks, Rob. Thanks for giving some insights as to, how the threat actors might kind of breach some of our clients' systems. Thank you for that.
No problem.
In keeping with our sort of back to basics theme today, one of the things that we try to as Mobius is whenever we have a technical finding is to try and take that back to what we call the root causes. In my mind, whatever we find from a penetration perspective is essentially a symptom of something that broke down within the development or QA of a system or implementation of a network. And so what we try to do is to try correlate those back to the governance and processes that should have been in place to pick this up in the first place, but typically wasn't, and obviously wasn't if we've got a vulnerability that we've identified. I'm going to ask Ray just to talk us through some of those root causes that we often see, and just to tie those back to sort of some of the findings that we might see and how that typically points to something that didn't happen further up the chain.
Yeah, Pat, I think it's as you said, we're not we're not looking at best practices and guidance. So looking at organizations such as NIST who are telling us what we need to do and how we need to manage passwords. So complexity is one thing, but length is more important, and making sure that we configure our systems accordingly. So the systems these days aren't as limited as they used to be. So we can use passphrases. We can make sure that we are configuring our systems to check against common dictionary passwords. So I think that's the first thing is security standards and best practices. Then also to look at the systems we use and are we using the technologies effectively? So, if we have systems out there that enable multi-factor authentication, are those switched on? Are we using those? You'll find so many organizations where the root cause, password length is not great and password security is not great. But then they have systems that have MFA capability. They just haven't turned them on yet. So that's something to consider. I think a big part of it is the awareness part as well. As you said, Pat, and just helping people figure out how to create a password that they won't forget, and that is long, and that no one else can guess. And then the last thing I think from our side is I think the security practices have got into a bit of a rut with this, 8 character passwords of length of 8, must have capitals, must have numbers, must have characters in them, and though that's no longer good enough. So we've sort of got into a habit of configuring systems according to that way of securing passwords, and that doesn't work anymore. What we really need is to look at passwords that are long, that don't change often, that we do use multi-factor authentication, and start looking at the NIST guidelines. And those are the things that we need to be doing on our modern computer systems to prevent against password hacking. So I think there is a lot we can do and a lot that we need to look at to prevent the abuse of passwords.
Yeah, I think another unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in with passwords is passwords still being hard coded into systems, or legacy systems having passwords hard coded into them. And I think an extension of the user awareness to the developers and secure development code, codes of practice and principles. Those really need to be enforced by organizations, because I think that's really one of the root causes that we see as well is poor development practices. And then Ray, just to final point from my side in terms of multi-factor authentication, it's really as organizations continue the adoption of cloud offerings from an infrastructure or from an application perspective, the multi-factor authentication is commonplace in most new technologies, especially cloud technologies, and it's typically just a flip of a switch that it can be implemented. So it's not as difficult as it used to be necessarily to roll out some of this multi-factor authentication opportunities. So there might be organizations might be stuck a bit in the past, so they're not really considering it because of how difficult it might have been. But as part of the cloud adoption, really, if the solution that you're looking to has multi-factor authentication built in, typically at no extra cost, there's very little reason to not kind of flip that switch. I don't know if you'd agree, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you look at the major service providers and cloud service providers. In many cases, it is as easy as flipping a switch, Pat. It's, I suppose, just figuring out the change management side of it. In many cases, users are reluctant, and there's an element of human change management around using multi-factor authentication, and so that comes into play. And then, it is a case of saying, how are we using all of those cloud security products effectively? We've got a whole array of security features that are on offer, and just checking, if multi-factor is available, let's use it. If data leakage prevention is available, let's use it. Are we using all of the features available to us as information security practitioners?
Well, thanks, guys. I think today was actually a really interesting chat. I mean, it's probably a concept everyone is aware of, and there's probably elements to it that most people are aware of. But the fact of the matter is, in our testing team, so Rob and Marco are from our testing team, we continuously find they continuously find these sort of problems. So, I think people are aware of it. It comes down to, how to solve it for your organization. I think that's where we as Mobius are quite fortunate to have, the likes of Rob and Marco testing our clients' infrastructure and applications, and then the likes of Ray and his team on the consulting side to say, how do we fix this from an organizational process and governance perspective so that hopefully doesn't happen again and doesn't manifest itself again. So guys, thanks very much for that chat. I think you brought kind of two very good angles both from a testing side of things as well as from a kind of a consulting and reparation side of things. So I think that was a good chat. Any last points?
Just from something that Rob was busy mentioning, Pat, one of the things that we also do, and we have found some relatively good success with it, is not only do we look for users on LinkedIn or go through previous data breaches and dumps to look for sort of like usernames that could work within the organization, we also use statistically likely usernames. So for example, we would try and build a list of, for example, security vendor _alerts, because at some point someone in an organization might have created an email box that needs to send out emails from alerting a certain team, and it would be security vendor _alerts or notifications or what have you. And oftentimes these things get set up, default passwords get used or really weak passwords get used, and they never get changed. So we have found that using that spraying technique along with usernames or sort of employee names and then these statistically likely service accounts has yielded some good results.
Yeah, thanks, Marco. I mean, I think it's everyone understands the principle, but it's kind of the devil's in the detail. We've got a username and we've got a password and hopefully some sort of two-factor authentication, and one needs to look at all of these kind of layers of controls and make sure that they're as locked down. Often, Marco, to your point, it's a vendor that's got their system on the network or something like that, and they deploying their own sort of usernames and stuff like that in on the network that sometimes the client isn't even aware of. So yeah, I mean, if there are accounts that aren't being used, often the generic accounts are overlooked when it comes to changing passwords and stuff like that. So those need to be scrutinized as well. Yeah, so thanks for raising that. All right, everyone. I think that kind of wraps up episode 2. Hope you got some interesting insights out of that. Look forward to chatting next time. Thanks, guys.